There have been a number of documentaries made in recent years that seem to have the objective of scandalizing Maharishi's personality, teachings, and organization. A lot of this is on YouTube, which has been bought and turned into a platform for Zionist and Christian propaganda intended to facilitate the various pursuits of the American political establishment. This comes as no surprise. Of course, there is also the motivation to make money by producing scandalous videos with clickbait titles. Ever since I learned the Transcendental Meditation, or TM technique, years ago, I have been interested in Maharishi and read some of his writings and listened to many of his speeches and practiced his meditation technique for more than a decade now. I never knew the man personally, and I'm not a member of his movement. I just don't tend to appreciate vain talk about every accomplished man that can be found, particularly a man who seems genuine in my view. So I'll comment on the various scandals and give my own opinion even if I cannot absolutely refute them. First of all, there's a couple of women claiming to have had sex with Maharishi. They even went as far as to claim that Maharishi had a child with some woman in his following, but that her identity has been hidden, which I think is a very incredible claim. Maharishi was like a messiah for most of his followers, so any child of his would be seen as the same, a second coming or an heir to his legacy. There would simply be too much at stake for it to be kept hidden for long. One of these women who says she had sex with Maharishi even went so far as to admit that it's time for people to understand that everyone needs intimacy or sexual contact at some point in their life, including so-called gurus. This makes me wonder why she would have even bothered to bring it up. In our modern culture, it's very close to being considered a major scandal and heinous crime on any occasion when a man with fame or followers or a position of authority has almost anything at all to do with women. At this point, most of us can understand that the tension between the sexes has resulted from the ideology of radical feminism, which has been played out for decades now, and consists of nothing but dead air and pathetic demands for attention. Women in our generation insist on occupying every space in society and all its institutions. And yet, they are hyper-fragile and unable to cope with any criticism or any stressful interactions with men or even other women. If Maharishi had sex with any of his followers at most, this would only put him on par with almost every other guru or swami who migrated to the West to make a name for themselves or spread their questionable teachings and techniques. If anything, Maharishi should be credited with smashing the anti-colonialist and anti-Western prejudices of the left-wing ideologues and their adherents. The liberals and regressives have whined for a century about Europeans colonizing and exploiting the populations in other countries. Now we have all undeniably witnessed what happens as soon as foreigners get bold enough to come proselytizing in our own countries. They immediately enslave middle-class college kids and start sexually exploiting young women and hoarding millions of dollars to enrich themselves and build their own plantations and colonies, often euphemistically called ashrams or communes. If anything, Maharishi humanized everyone by his actions. Personally, I don't really believe that Maharishi ever had sex with anyone, and definitely not any of his followers. Not because of what anyone says on the matter, but simply because Maharishi was so peaceful and unperturbed. He was more saint-like than anyone I've ever seen or read about. He just didn't appear to have a lustful bone in him. Maharishi was obviously very enamored with the fundamental, natural processes of life, which in a sane society under good conditions would of course include marriage and sex, and a lot of children. However, in our modern world, there is nothing but conflict between men and women, so it only makes sense that a very peaceful man would remain celibate and take joy in spiritual, intellectual pursuits. The woman who claimed she had sex with Maharishi said herself that he was just like Jesus in her mind, which scandalizes religion itself, and reveals a lot about the real motivations and inclinations of most of the congregations of the typical modern church or synagogue or temple. Modern people cannot cope with sex. They cannot understand it. They cannot accept it free from some twisted puritanical reflex inhibiting them without them even knowing why. Or else they must compulsively make the deed as scandalous and dramatic as possible for show. It's embarrassing and needs to stop. As for the claims that Maharishi financially exploited his followers, mostly the TM teachers, I just laugh at the suggestion because the fact is that the TM teachers made a lot of money, and many of them are quite wealthy themselves, and a lot of them became teachers with the motivation to get rich or become a guru with their own cult following. So if Maharishi made them pay their dues, it's perfectly fine. The TM technique didn't cost much when I learned it, and there were a lot of ways to get it for free, such as being a student or a drunk or an ex-convict or some impoverished person or someone recovering from severe trauma. The plain truth is that in spiritual matters, you must give in order to receive. Actually, most of life works that way. It's actually the case that nowadays a lot of teachers squabble with each other over money, and the whole TM movement is hungry for donations just to stay afloat. It's hardly Maharishi's fault. He explicitly told them that his intention was for them to spend 12 or 15 hours a day engaged in very hard work, or dynamic activity, as he often called it, and only 40 minutes were to be spent in meditation. Instead, the TM teachers apparently wish to become a new class of Brahmins or gurus so that they don't have to work at all. It's an embarrassment. And it's contrary to Maharishi's teachings. I can say one thing quite confidently. Maharishi was not a feminist or a communist or any kind of liberal. In his dissertations about the three goddesses Lakshmi, Saraswati, and Durga, he repeatedly, many times, emphasizes the absolutely crucial, indispensable role of the mother at home. Every mother at home is supposed to exhibit the qualities of service, wisdom, and strength in a feminine way. I will describe these qualities and how the meditation technique bestows them in a later section of this essay. For now, I'll expound further that Maharishi was not a feminist. He never ever endorsed abortion, which is extremely taboo in traditional Vedic law and statutes. He would never have endorsed the idea of spinsterhood or promiscuity, which are likewise anti-Vedic, in the sense that it is against rata, or the essence of auspiciousness and benefic influence. Anything that is not regenerative, productive, healthy, and wholesome, anything that does not promote compassion and virtue and facilitate the acquisition of wisdom and prosperity, is certainly against the whole thrust of the Vedas. Anyone citing Tantra or Agora as a counter-argument is not doing any damage to what I've said, and I know well enough what they are talking about. These amount to shadow work, in the sense that they reveal the hidden aspects of ourselves and teach us wisdom through what we lack by exposing our weaknesses and faults, or forcing us to face our fears. They are not meant to supplant Dharma at any point. Maharishi believed in the value of motherhood and marriage. He said that whoever earns the money for the household should decide how it is spent. And he affirmed repeatedly by his expressions that all people are to honor, protect, and support their mothers. The institution of marriage is to be cherished and kept wholesome and harmonious. There should be domestic tranquility in the home, which is the realm of the wife and mother, without whom no home can be established. Women are essential to the formation and stability of a household, of making a place into a home with staying power. Anyone can see with perfect clarity that this is in stark and total opposition to any form of feminism. Feminism and capitalism combined have made the modern world a totally uprooted and unfamiliar place with no bonds between people and nowhere to call home. No permanence to anything and no sanctuary for families to be established. People move around constantly and never acquire lasting wealth or any heritage. And it is precisely because feminism and capitalism and so many other horrible lifestyle choices have turned women completely hostile toward all men and made them incapable of forming lasting relationships or peaceful households. That is an obvious fact. Furthermore, Maharishi believed in the veneration of goddesses, and this is demonstrated by so many of his lectures.
by several of the bija mantras or seed syllables. The sounds he selected to have taught in the TM initiations and used for meditation. And it is also shown by the celebration of Mother Divine, which Maharishi instituted. These things are also totally contrary to feminism and capitalist materialism, or communist materialism for that matter. Modern women are trained to refuse help and refuse to accept any higher authority. They are taught to be arrogant and conceited, and self-aggrandizing as a reflex that keeps them in perpetual conflict with men and the divine. The effect of this has only impoverished and disgraced modern women, which was the goal of capitalist materialism in the first place, so that every woman should be the property of corporations instead of belonging to her husband, her family, and community. Women today exist in a state of perpetual stress and paranoia. It has been steadily getting worse for centuries now. Dr. Carl Jung himself spoke about the stress put on modern women, especially Protestant or secular women, because of the absence of the archetypal divine feminine, or mother divine. The role of a wife and mother is demanding enough. But the effect of Christianity, and especially Protestantism or secularism, is that every woman must fill the role of the household goddess. She has to be everything to the man in her life, and it is too tall an order for her to fill. Men without goddesses tend to be weak and selfish and egomaniacal, the same as women without goddesses or gods. As Carl Jung tactfully put it, this is a matter of psychological hygiene and should be recognized as such, at the very least. One of the other claims disparaging Maharishi is that he wasn't a real Brahmin, and he wasn't a real guru. He was not an actual disciple of Guru Dev, but instead just his bookkeeper. This is supposed to be discrediting, but personally I think it makes Maharishi 10 times more credible and a much more impressive person. Indeed, I find it very inspiring to know that Maharishi was not a Brahmin, and therefore not an official guru. I'm so glad to know that he had the strength of character to transcend the decayed traditions, and, having grasped the essence of the traditional knowledge of the Vedas, made the most virtuous decision to present that knowledge to the world for a nominal fee, rather than hoarding it and keeping it concealed from the masses, which is the work of Brahmins and gurus. Everything that I have seen of Maharishi gives me the impression that he was very tranquil and tolerant. As such, he is at a variance with most modern gurus. Maharishi was very pragmatic, but also very conciliatory, and as far as I've seen or heard, he never insulted or disparaged anyone. He maintained firm positivity and graciousness. Maharishi apparently advocated vegetarianism, though I've never heard or read of his position on diet. However, I've heard that he once said that the best food for an individual is whatever their mother fed them. This reinforces his staunch insistence on maintaining local, regional, and national cultures. It seems Maharishi was a vegetarian. That's my only serious disagreement with him. From listening to recordings of Maharishi some years before he died, it seems he went senile. Vegetarianism is a component of modern Hinduism. Right-wing radical gurus will say that it always has been, but I strongly doubt that assertion. Now, in our times, the vast majority of people in the world eat at least 60% plant-based food and chronic health problems abound. There's not really a good counterpoint against this realization. People who eat more meat appear to be much stronger and healthier. Of course, the mainstay of the civilized human diet is carbohydrates. India today is the most vegetarian country in the world, with about 30% of the population practicing total vegetarianism. The Indian society is also riddled with illness and malnourishment. This is an indictment of so many aspects of contemporary Hinduism and the culture it has produced. I know that Maharishi didn't insist on any dietary restrictions to learn or practice TM, and he repeatedly affirmed that the TM technique is the proper way to advance in spiritual practice and the fulfillment of human life. Of course, with prolonged meditation practice, a person will develop more compassion and see the natural beauty and value in life. This will bring them into conflict with many aspects of modern culture. I'm sure there are people struggling with this issue, and there's very little helpful guidance made available for them. Of course, the sedentary Brahmins and gurus will insist that vegetarianism is a morally superior and spiritually necessary diet. From my experiences, I know they're wrong about the spiritual side of dieting. From my life experience and realizations, I know that they were also wrong about the morality of a plant-based diet. The modern lifestyle of civilized people requires so much habitat destruction just to find arable land to grow these toxic, anti-nutritious crops. Millions of animals are displaced and killed by this process, and the environment is toxified by all the herbicides and pesticides required by large-scale farming. The soil is being eroded permanently, which means that sooner or later farming as we know it will abruptly end for a very, very long time. The Brahmins' justification for this absurd wastefulness and destruction is that they cannot bear to shed blood and consume meat. This is just silly for so many reasons. First of all, because every religion requires sacrifice. If our own mode of life and our health and strength and vitality are not justifiable reasons to eat a natural diet, then it really is pointless to even talk of civilization or anything to do with it. Civilizations have always routinely required the blood, sweat, and tears of the human population. Yet the decadent Brahmins think they are proving something by refusing to eat meat and emaciating themselves. They demand that Sudras must toil and Kshatriyas must fight and die for the sake of the civilization that keeps them safe and fed and comfortably at their own leisure. Yet they will not permit of anyone else to get their basic needs met. Ironically, or perhaps fittingly, the less meat a person consumes, the more peevish, intolerant, and megalomaniacal they invariably become. They certainly find it easy to dismiss the lives and struggles of other people. The most important thing a person should do regarding their diet is to avoid toxins in anything that upsets the stomach and the bowels, which most vegetarian diets do, actually. Seed oils and corn byproducts are very irritating to the stomach, and many vegetables and grains contain various toxins or anti-nutrients that are actually deleterious to human health if consumed in large quantities over a long period of time. Dairy products are also not sufficient to fill in the gaps left by removing meat from the human diet, especially since many populations cannot even drink milk. The Brahmins don't have much compassion for people who do the necessary work in fighting and supportive roles that keep civilization going. And yet the Brahmins and gurus all want to live in civilization and enjoy its resources, institutions, and services. Obviously, this is an outrageous hypocrisy. The Mahabharata itself speaks of this. The Brahmins in the Kali Yuga have become totally corrupted, and they seek the favor of wicked rulers. They always seek the subsidy of politicians and in return attack the enemies of the political class, which are always the very same people living in the jurisdiction of their governments, whose labor they desire to tax and spend on their own largesse in totally wasteful, utterly bankrupt ideologies. Of course, the Brahmins don't feel any shame in demanding tribute and donations from the same population that they conspire against. It is certainly a good thing that Maharishi was from a Kshatriya family, and it does so much to affirm the necessity of the warrior class and men with heroic spirit. If Maharishi would not denounce the crooked Brahmins because he was too positive and too inoffensive, then I will certainly do it. And in my opinion, the only priestly class that can be justified is the Teutonic version of it, as described by the Roman historian Tacitus. The leaders of society should share in all the essential and wholesome work that keeps the nation healthy and strong and functioning optimally. If anyone dares to declare himself a priest or holy man, he should also be a warrior and a hard-working man. If anyone aspires to be a leader, he should be capable of at least the basic work of the population that he intends to be leading. We don't need any more unimpressive leaders, who in fact are just rhetoricians or politicians. Rhetorical tricks don't make a man worthy to lead or govern. The world in our generation requires very powerful, very wise, very virtuous men to lead it, and no one else. If the Brahmins or rabbis or preachers want to be part of society, they should contribute meaningfully to it. And just reciting the literal word of old books is not a helpful or edifying contribution. In fact, Maharishi has shown with his technique that spiritual practice is mostly an internal, individual endeavor. The actual spiritual class is the artists and musicians and singers. So much esoteric knowledge is transmitted to the artist in the moment of inspiration, even without the artist himself understanding it fully or at all in some cases. However, many artists have special insights of a deeply spiritual essence. Anyone who thinks that art and music are not worthy modes of spiritual revelation cannot hope to prove that books are more worthy as a medium. They're only a step away from becoming an iconoclast. Most, if not all of us, have so many impressions from various personalities, performances, songs, and pieces of art collected in our memory. Who can say what will lead a person to wisdom? What will give them a different perspective on life, or imbue them with compassion?
There are limitless windows of knowledge opening all the time and innumerable channels of insight. In my opinion, there is no one other than God who can say what will or won't lead to knowledge and awareness. However, in many religious sects, including a lot of Vaishnavas and various Brahmins, this is not acceptable, and they will assert that only gurus and only specific scriptures are legitimate pathways to knowledge. Inevitably, this too becomes a dogma, and it is quite capable of being turned into a theocratic ideology or a motivation to persecute others for no real harms other than the offense that arrogant Brahmins feel when they are not immediately and unquestioningly placated. Such an attitude is the exact opposite of spiritual development. No one needs to speak of Brahmins or gurus. No one ought to mention Arianism or the Buddha or any Messiah or anything purporting to be holy, if they have not first internalized and developed the dual attributes of wisdom and compassion. Anyone who propounds dogma without having realized the two most foundational spiritual values is nothing but a villain who wears a mask of virtue. The greatest contribution of Maharishi is his gift to the world. The use of bija mantras in a meditation technique that first emulates a form of chanting called madhyama, or mental chanting. But he has made it so easy and effortless that anyone can do it and attain spiritual awareness and development in their personal life. Over time, this technique naturally shifts into a form of chanting known as para, which is so effortless and so essential that it is manifold more powerful. And that, once attained, is the ultimate gift that he gave to all beings because it is immensely beneficial. No matter how he presented it, no matter how he had to portray it, the simple fact is that he gave a very potent, auspicious, restorative technique to the world. Those claiming that the meditation technique has side effects or that some people cannot handle it may have a point simply because there's too many people who go into the practice with judgment or resistance for one reason or another. I think it's akin to the same reason so many of them scandalize the act of sexual union. Of course, they cannot achieve spiritual union or yoga when they have nothing but resentment against divine beings or anything that doesn't conform to the dogmas and superstitions they were taught in school, church, the synagogue, the mosque, or in college for that matter. The technique is not meant to be challenged or struggled with. It is true that certain bija mantras have certain effects, and Maharishi selected only some of the many bijas, or seed syllables, that are known and available. He likely chose the ones he thought to be the most benevolent and the easiest for common people to assimilate without too much of a shock. The last thing I will mention is one of the more ridiculed aspects of the TM movement. It's called yogic flying, and basically it consists of the standard fair acolytes of the movement hopping around on mattresses. It is cringe-inducing to watch and very embarrassing on the face of it, so it's not really defensible, and I often wonder why Maharishi encouraged it. Having attended the Cities program and being somewhat familiar with Patanjali's sutras, I see where he got the idea. I have also read Buddhist scriptures such as the Visuddhimagga that emphatically state, if the feeling of love is strong enough, a person will float through the air. At the end of the city course, I felt very light. I felt a sensation of floating in my body as if I might come off the ground. Of course, internally, I felt perfect bliss. And I've experienced that feeling many times while meditating just by using the basic TM technique. I have heard a couple of individuals claim that they levitated, but only once and without much awareness of it in the moment. I've even watched an interview of a man who quit the movement, in which he said that he had the experience of floating across a room, but later decided that it was a delusion and he had lost his mind. Whether a person can actually float or not is something I can't say for certain at this point. I've never witnessed it, nor have I done it myself, even though I felt very close. How or why it works is a larger subject to delve into. Maharishi believed it had to do with accessing the fundamental laws of the universe. He studied physics, and so he often used semi-scientific parlance. From what I've seen and experienced already, I'm not willing to challenge the miraculous or magical claims of the old stories and scriptures. I believe that spiritual practice is the art of making anything possible by not accepting any limits. Obviously, material life requires a person to be pragmatic, but spiritual life requires a person to strive for a higher state of existence. So Maharishi was cultivating this attitude in his followers. In my opinion, they should have done it quietly and not made a show of it with nothing impressive to present. I don't understand Maharishi's insistence on this particular part of the program. It makes me wonder if he was already a bit senile by then. Nonetheless, it doesn't damage the TM technique in my opinion, because the fact is that stress relief, as it's so often hailed nowadays, is actually a superpower for modern people. Stress is the primary ailment of modern societies, and it has been this way for a long time. Virtually no one else offers any techniques or practices for reducing stress. They only harp on misunderstood scriptures or prescribe dubious and often dangerous pharmaceutical products. These are not solutions for any problem. They only cause more problems for the individual and everything connected to them. Even the Alcoholics Anonymous program operates on the assumption that a person cannot recover from serious addictions unless they undergo a spiritual awakening of some kind. Maharishi's technique is credited with helping recovering addicts. As a veteran who was becoming an alcoholic at the time when I learned TM, now I have no substance addictions, and I have retained my strength and energy into middle age. I will argue that Maharishi's technique is exactly what modern societies need and what no one else will ever offer them. Cultivating bliss within yourself is justifiable alone. Once you have experienced this, there's no more cause for argumentation on the matter. Anyone who thinks that religion is about original sin or prophecies of violence or obligations to suffer and mourn is a fool and a savage pretending to be civilized. The two core values of any real spiritual practice should always be wisdom and compassion. Without first attaining them both, there's no need to even speak of anything extraordinary, or any high-minded ideals or lofty plans. Such things become nothing but schemes and heinous plots and excuses for brutality. Any spiritual, philosophical, or psychological program that does not cultivate bliss and self-knowledge within the individual is just a fraudulent waste of time. All materialist theories of existence are likewise utterly mundane and pointless. They will be to no avail against the tribulations of life. Any person who wishes to cultivate positivity and motivation in their life must have some kind of inspiring ideal, and such things are abstractions that dwell in the mind, in the imagination, or in the emotional yearnings of the person. They are not material facts. We need to have confidence in our own internal identity and purpose, which is why TM is so essential as a technique for integrating and clarifying our inner self. As Maharishi proposed, we are meant to achieve cohesive integration of the full self and the fulfillment of both spiritual and material satisfaction in unity with each other.